You're still watching Business AM, but most certainly Metropole TV. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiaga. This morning we are joined by George Munga, and we're going to tell you exactly what you are waking up to today, or what is really going to affect the weight of the money in your pocket. Now, a survey conducted by the Kenya Private Sector Alliance has revealed that small, medium and micro enterprises across all sectors of the economy have been the biggest casualties of the COVID-19 pandemic compared to the large companies, which had information to prepare early for an economic crisis. Now, according to the survey, 85% of small companies were highly affected, along with 83% of mid-sized enterprises, with only 70% of large companies experiencing the pinch of the virus. Now, the survey, which was done between 17th and 21st April, further shows that tourism and education were the most impacted sectors, with 95% and 93% of firms in the two sectors being the most hit. Now, this is following the implementation of health closure directives. Now, KEPSA Chief Executive Officer Caroline Kariuki Karuga has said that 52% of micro small enterprises and 58% of small enterprises laid off employees, with construction, forestry, fisheries, agriculture, security, sports and tourism being the sectors with the most job layoffs. Now, according to the survey's respondents, most businesses are asking for financial support from the government in form of grants or cheap accessible loans to cover operating costs, especially salaries. Now, the private sector is optimistic that the reduction of value-added tax, pay as you earn and corporate tax will benefit the largest number of businesses, but payment of pending bills and VAT refunds remains key, affecting businesses in meeting financial obligations and liquidity. Now, these figures represent the lowest levels since November 2017, as the Market Stanbic Bank Kenya Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, which tracks business performance in the manufacturing and services sector, fell, now wait for it, to 34.8 in April from 37.5% in March, from 49.9 in February. Now, readings above 50 signal growth in business, and the latest data is just shy of the record low of 34.4 reported in October 2017, just weeks after Kenya had come out of the two presidential elections. Wow, that's where we start from this morning, George. It doesn't look good. That's what KEPSA is painting. But then they say that the only way they see things being a bit better is because of the reduced corporate tax. That is a negative 5% from 30%. And they're also saying that pay as you earn will also come in. But then they say, the reality is that most businesses are requesting for a grant from the government to cover their operating costs and, most importantly, their salaries, which is what everybody has been talking about, but it has not been forthcoming. Do you think that now, more than ever, therefore, that we will see the government react now, because that is where we stand?
Government has to react if this economy is to hold for the better part of this year, probably next year.
Yes.
Remember, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we already had an economic meltdown in Kenya, so to speak. That is coming from 2018, 2019. IMF had projected that we are going to grow our economy by around 5.9 to 6.2% in 2020. But that is not going to happen. In fact, they have reviewed the projections downwards to around 3.4, which has further been reviewed downwards to around 1.9. The way things are going, we might even have a contraction in the economy, so that we'll record maybe a negative growth in the economy. And that is not unique only to Kenya. If you look at the EU countries, they are projecting their economies to contract by between 1% and 3%, the same to Asia,
yes,
and even the US. So it is not something that is unique to Kenya alone. Coming back to Kenya, at the beginning of this pandemic, most companies or most firms project that it would go for maybe 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months maximum. But probably that's not the case. This pandemic is going to be with us for maybe 6 months to 1 year, or even more than 1 year thereabout. And therefore, most firms had put in reserves maybe to last them for 1 month or 2 months. But with those reserves now depleted, most firms are looking at cash crunch or cash flow problems in the next few months. That has necessitated most firms going into now not only sending employees on unpaid leaves, but relieving those employees altogether.
Yes.
You saw what Kenya Airways was proposing, and the same mirrors what Qatar Airways proposed in the UAE, that they decided to release their employees for indefinitely,
yes,
until things turn around. In the Kenyan context, already we've seen huge shockers in the agribusiness sector, especially horticulture and floriculture, because most of our markets are closed, and therefore we cannot export some of these products to those markets. What happens therefore is that they cannot hold their staff who are on the production lines, and therefore they had to release some of the staffs temporarily, albeit for now. You come to the banking sector. I just did a research on the bank sector, and most of them are doing not necessarily new lending, but they're doing restructures on the loan portfolios that they have.
Yes.
And most customers are requesting for moratorium altogether, both interest and principal. So they're projecting not to pay anything between now and the next 12 months.
Yes.
What that implies in the banking sector is that they are not going to earn any revenue from this loan portfolio. So the banking sector will only earn maybe from transaction income, but not interest income.
Mm-hmm. Not forgetting, but the transaction income has also been hit now for the next 3 months, isn't it? Yes.
Agree with you. And therefore, some of these firms will post decreased revenues for the better part of this year.
Yes.
You've not seen restructuring or layoffs in the banking sector, but maybe if this thing that doesn't ease down in the next maybe 2 quarters, then you'll start seeing that. You go to the education sector, which has been badly hit, as you mentioned, up to 95%,
yes,
95%, with the suspension of education in the country,
mm-hmm,
meaning most players in that sector cannot pay even their salaries. They cannot pay their day-to-day obligations because they're not getting those incomes that they were getting. Remember, we were just in the first term of our education calendar, and that probably is the busiest term for most of these players, and it was cut short at the middle. So they're facing cash flow problems, especially starting the month of May, going into June.
Yes.
What does this portend for the economy? You look at our foreign exchange reserves. I think that is the biggest headache for central bank now. Foreign remittances from the region in diaspora is still quite good, mm-hmm, but our exports have gone down, and therefore our current account deficit is likely to go from bad to worse in the next few months. Government is trying to negotiate with IMF for a cautionary debt that, if that comes through, then probably it can hold our forex levels at albeit in the next 2, 3, 4 quarters. So in summary, the outlook is not very good economically, But I hope that this thing can be contained within 2020,
Yes.
so that as we start 2021, at least now the government can now struggle with jump-starting the economy with this pandemic behind us. Otherwise, if it goes longer than that, then we are foreseeing a very bad recession, similar to what happened in 1918, 1920. Because this is not only unique to Kenya;
Yes.
it is world over, and most economies are grappling with the same problems that we are grappling with in Kenya.
It's good that we're talking about that this morning, just George, before we go to the next issue that I wanted us to look at this morning, is that yes, there have been announcements, but every announcement that the government is making, you sort of feel like it's tilted towards the banking sector. Now, we do know that the CBK did announce the other week that they're mulling for 100 billion shillings in terms of a fund that's supposed to go directly to the SMEs, which we are also getting this morning, that the ones that are heavily affected, therefore, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, because the bigger businesses didn't have time, therefore, to make decisions exactly how they were supposed to go around it. Is that enough? And do you like the fact that it's not actually going directly to these businesses, that even this 100B that we're talking about is going to be given to the banks, and then it's upon the discretion of these SMEs, therefore, to go and get this money from the bank, as opposed to it getting channeled directly to these businesses? Is that where the disconnect is when it comes to understanding, therefore, how this is going to affect the growth of the economy?
I think probably government is not very sure how to do this economic stimulus.
Yes.
But I believe they're juggling between offering grants directly to SMEs and channeling it through the banks.
Yes.
Again, you look at our economic model, and maybe giving direct grants to SMEs might not work, in my opinion.
Yes.
So if it was to be granted through the banks, maybe the central bank would be tasked to monitor this fund in such a way that banks don't misuse it. Because in most cases you find banks misusing that opportunity and trying to make a killing out of it, so that they get this fund maybe at 5-6%, but you still find them lending them at 13-14%.
Yes.
So I think the onus will be on central bank to regulate this fund in such a way that it achieves the intended purpose. But on the other hand, if government was to give this grant directly, then you expect the inefficiencies of the government to be loaded over into this fund. And I bet you that if it was done directly by the government, then you start hearing of corruption cases, looting of those funds. So I think going through the banks is the best option, but central bank must take the responsibility to monitor this fund from end to end, so that it achieves the desired purpose.
Pretty much. Just hold on to that, because I'm coming back to you there on that there for this morning. Now, let's therefore go into the next story, which is, we're just going to mention this, so we jump into the next story now. Days after the Kenya Tea Development Agency rejected the proposed regulations to govern the tea industry, the East African Tea Traders Association, EATA, has called on the government to re-evaluate the proposed regulations. Now, in a statement, the association says that the proposed rules could expose the tea industry to undue government influence. Now, last month, Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Peter Munga proposed regulatory remedies to protect tea and coffee farmers from a middleman who exploit the vulnerabilities of small-scale farmers. IATA has singled out the requirement that teas that are not sold during a particular auction shall be relisted for sale during the subsequent auction, saying that such a move should be allowed to happen at any subsequent auction and not the immediate subsequent auction, as this may cause logistical hurdles. Now, the association has termed as unrealistic the proposal that requires all tea buyers or exporters to value at least 40% of annual tea exports, saying implementation of the regulation will require huge capital investments and government support, hence cannot be left to buyers to achieve on their own within 2 years. Now, Kenya's tea industry is among the country's top foreign exchange earners, accounting for 22% of the country's foreign exchange earnings. Now, why is the fight between KTDA and the government in the new regulations? And how do we understand the position of the farmer in this fight between KTDA and the government. Now, that's what I wanted us to look at. Just because of time, we're going to come back to that. Now, the International Monetary Fund also on Wednesday said its executive board, that's last week, has approved $739 million in emergency financing to help Kenya respond to the economic shock caused by the novel coronavirus pandemic. According to Reuters, the IMF said it was in close contact with the Kenyan authorities and stood ready to provide policy advice and further support as needed. Now, question now for being this morning, George. Yes, we do understand that coronavirus is going to affect our economy deeply. There were fears that we're bound to wipe $1 trillion of our economy by the time we're done with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I'm getting a 50-50 feeling about this, and that's what everybody's getting about when we did get this news. IMF did not accept our request for us to be in the list of those nations that actually could be given a debt relief from them. No, they kicked us out. Number two, they have been warning us about the way in which we perceive our 9 trillion shillings debt ceiling that we've set for ourselves. In fact, they said last year, you're already beyond it. Despite the fact that you're saying you're going to get there by 2022. Good. Last week, we did see us floating a 50 billion shillings bond. Immediately after that, we're talking about $73.9 million that are coming from IMF. And just before we got to April, we're talking about our debt raising up by 132 just in March alone because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Which therefore begs the question, do you feel that this is just a way of sort of painting an economic crisis into COVID-19 relief? Is that where we stand right now? Because we did get the information, again, from the CBK governor in his early briefs, is that our economy has got what it takes to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. A month before that, we're talking about debt and more debt. Is it an economic crisis that is being overshadowed by the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think even as early as 2019, we were already in a fiscal crisis, so to speak.
Yes.
You remember the central bank government at one time, I think that was in Q2, had come out and said clearly that we were in a debt distress as a country.
Yes.
I think that should have been July, August last year. And even IMF itself, themselves had warned that Kenya was almost at the ceiling of their the debt levels.
Yes.
And therefore, I think COVID-19 would not have come at a worse time than the time it came. But now that it is here, I think what I would have wanted to see from IMF more of not increase in our debt levels, but more of grants to cushion us within this COVID-19 period. Yes. But remember, the way IMF views us, we are viewed as a middle-income economy as opposed to a less developed economy. Yes. That is why you find in most cases us we are given more of debt than grants. If you are to look at the books of countries like Malawi or countries like Lesotho, you'll find that they get more of grants than debt. But in our case, our economic statistics places us at the level where we are considered middle income economy, and therefore we attract more debt as opposed to grants. Yes. But at this level, I don't think more debt will work good for our economy. We are already at our very high levels of our debt portfolios as an economy, and therefore increasing more debt is not going to jumpstart or to breathe life into our economy. I want to believe that government is looking at probably restructuring some of these debt portfolios that they already have with our foreign debt holders, or if that is not the case, then they get get grants to pay off some of these debts, or if they were to get more debt, then they get them at fairly priced rates so that they can manage their interest expense. Remember, some of our debts are quite highly attracted very high interest.
Yes.
In fact, almost commercial rates, so to speak. Like if you look at our foreign bonds, they were almost at market rates. So if the government can negotiate fairly priced debts to pay off some of our expensive debt, then that could work. Some economic magic to them.
Yes.
But as it is today, I don't think adding more debt to our portfolio is going to work to our advantage.
There was this proposal that was floated by some economic analysts on exactly what we need to do now. We've seen Rwanda actually say we have to start talking about postponing our repayments for at least 2 years.
Exactly.
And they were quite stance on that point. They said, well, we have to. All right. If we had actually also sought for debt relief, then we could be talking about freeing some 83.4 billion shillings that we could have injected back into the economy to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. But we didn't, George. We did not. The only way for us out is that we went for another debt, 73.9 billion. When in reality, had we stood strong, then we could be having 83.4 floating. So do you feel that this is just swapping fiscal consolidation for IMF support?
I think this is what I normally call prescribing a painkiller for a tumor.
Yes.
Which just gives you a temporary relief for your problem, but doesn't sort out the problem. I expected government to, at the onset of this pandemic, to go to our debt holders and ask for a suspension or a moratorium of our debt for at least 2 or 3 years. That will give them room to, one, reorganize their finances and channel the little that they collect in the economy back to the economy to jumpstart some of our companies, so that at least we can be able to sustain this economy. But it is not too late yet. The governments can still go back to our debt holders and negotiate for some of these moratoriums, so that we can suspend our payments altogether for the next 1 or 2 years. Or at the worst, we can pay maybe interest only at a subsidized rate for the next 1 or 2 years, so that whatever little that the government is able to collect in the economy, they pay part of it, a small percentage, to our debt holders, and a bigger percentage is channeled back to the economy. I don't think this is the best time government can be able to pay those high debt levels that they have. Remember, the other time we were talking of around 86 billion that's going into debt every month,
yes,
which was not sustainable even before COVID-19. Now with the COVID-19, I don't think government is going to collect enough money even to pay the interest obligations on their loans. And by adding more debt or more bonds into our debt portfolio, you are adding into our interest payments,
yes,
you are adding into our principal payments, and that might cripple us. And maybe when I talk about the Greece scenario, it is not very far-fetched. We might find ourselves in that scenario if we don't remedy our situations now. This is the time to start negotiating this economy. And when you're negotiating this economy, you must put your feet down, because this economy is also distressed, and they would want to push their side as much as possible. So you must put all your cards on the table and tell this is what is possible, this is what is not possible.
Yes. Want to point you out to what Ukuri Atani, and this morning I was telling Stephanie Maso whether it's okay for us to call him new in that office or old, because he knows the task that he has at hand right now. It came in with a promise that it was going to reduce our expenditure substantially. In fact, his biggest vote of confidence was, I have to rewrite the wrongs that would teach got this government into. But if you look as of where we are right now, from March to April, is he still sticking to that promise, or he got into that office and said, well, talk is cheap?
I think Atani, I think now is fairly old in that office. I think he's acclimatized to that office.
He has,
but if I was to be in his, I would not want to. I don't envy his position now, because he came in at a time when the government was already having fiscal crisis, and at least for the time he came in, he had policies, or he had good visions on how he was going to remedy that position. But barely, I think, 3 months into the office, then we have this pandemic. And simple, I can tell you, for this pandemic, no government it caught all governments. I think, let me put it that way. No government was ready for this pandemic, including the big economies.
Yes.
All governments have tried to fumble around to see the best possible way to manage this pandemic as we go along. So I think Yatani could not have come at a worse time than this. But this is a time not to try to figure what has happened before. This is a time to focus and see what can we do and what's the best that we can do at this particular time, so that we can remedy the situation as we go along. This is a time to think very fast, not to take time planning, so that you can see what you're going to do in the next 2-3 months. So I expect Treasury to be reviewing our statistics day in, day out, and come up with policies that can be able us to can enable the economy to sustain itself. I think this is the time we talk about sustainability, not even growth. I'm not worried about growth, but I'm worried about sustainability. Can we sustain this economy for the next 2 or 3 years? That would be the challenge for Mr. Yatani.
Pretty much, isn't it? Now, George, just as we cap this conversation this morning, people here talk about debt, about bonds, about rising debt levels in this country. What does that mean? How do the people get affected when you have a government when the only thing they're into is just raising debt? How do they get affected?
Let me tell you. Let me just give you a brief on how Greece found themselves in where they were in 2019. I think now their figures are starting to look better. But how they got themselves into that mess was that they accumulated so much debt into their portfolio that they were not able to pay off the debt from what they were collecting. So it reached a point where all the collections in the economy were channeled towards repayment of debt. They had nothing to reinvest back into the economy, or even to pay their obligations. So if they were to pay their obligations, they had to go back to the market, borrow more to pay their obligations. Yes. What that portends for a government is the only institution that earns money by spending. If they don't spend, they don't earn money. So if the government is not spending on infrastructure, is not spending on the basics, on education, on manufacturing, then they don't get a single dime in tax revenue. So for our case, if we continue accumulating our debt, and those debt don't go into sectors of the economy that can bring in returns as fast as possible, then you find after some time the government cannot keep up with the rising interest repayment or capital repayment month by month from their collections. So you find that all that they collect goes into debt repayment. So they cannot be able to pay their day-to-day obligations, their salaries, the development expenditure, and that is how you find the economy starting to look down, because now everything you collect is channeled out. Yes. And when you do that, even your currency starts to tumble, because you don't have FX reserves in your treasury to be able to cushion your economy. So I think it is a delicate balance between managing your debt levels and sustaining your economy, and even growing it. The treasury mandarins, or those who are at planning, must be able to review these debt levels day in, day out, so that they maintain that balance, so that, and in as much as you're accumulating debt, you balance it between what you're accumulating and the repayment that you're supposed to do month on month, and your development expenditure.
Pretty much. George, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That's exactly the time that we had for you this morning. But remember, take him back to the time that he walked into the studio, and I promise once we have him back, we shall be looking at these issues between KTDA and the government and the position of the farmer in this fight. Who's more powerful, the farmer, KTDA, or the CS, agriculture, or should I say the government in this sense? Text us 20146, that is your SMS line, at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. Talk to me at Charles_Kiage. We take a short break. Once we come back, let's talk about the transport industry.